third session of the 2016-2017 Wednesday morning roundtable presentation. When the group was looking at programs earlier in the summer, Dan Fessenden said, I think the anniversary of the Blueprint is coming up. And we looked at our calendars, and 10 years ago yesterday, a group of 23 got together up at the college to have a discussion. And really, what we're going to do this morning is multifold. The first is to talk a little bit about how this all came about, give an update on the 7 areas that were discussed, and then Dan Fessenden is going to wrap us up with a discussion of where do we go from here. So how this all started, just from a historical point of view, a question. How many of you, if you would just show your hands, were not in the jobs or in this city 10 years ago? Okay, large group. So 10 years ago, this started with a connector and a casino. At the time, there was a proposal in June of 2006, or May, to put a casino in downtown or somewhere in the city of Auburn. And a group of individuals were not necessarily opposed to a casino, but they just didn't think that was the best way to do economic development. And as things are, and I can only talk about him because he's not here, we had somebody who was the epitome of Malcolm Gladwell's community connector, Matteo Bartolota, who was convening groups of lunches next door at Curly's on a regular basis to talk about this idea that he didn't think was good for the community. And in the red suspender room down there, he met with several individuals, including the people who were talking about building the casino, and just said this was a bad idea. And pretty much the only people who really seemed to be supportive of a group of community leaders were those who said this would be good if they got the concession for the pawn shop and the check cashing facility next to the casino as a matter of economic development. So one of the things that Matteo Bartolota is very good at is bringing people together and also making phone calls, or at least having Debbie make phone calls on his behalf, for those of you who know him, to get people in the room. And one of the people that he talked to was Mike Mazzolio, who was somewhat, I would say, at best, ambivalent about this issue, having dealt with the issue of this in the state, but really talked to him and said, can we just get together a discussion? And there was no real rhyme or reason how the 23 people came together other than they put a list together. And some of them are here in the room, and I'd like to just introduce them real quickly. Obviously there are some members of the Blueprint group who are here, but among the group were Dick Bosheen and Mike Kassler, Dave Delastrito, who couldn't be with us, Dan Fessenden, Jesse Klein, who helps coordinate this operation, Bob Pine, who's in the back, and I would like to ask a couple of people to stand up, but Bob Pine was among the original group, but he's back there at the trouble table in the back. He's also there with Hal Miller and Jack Bisgrove. If you two gentlemen would give a wave as well. But these were some of the individuals, along with Anthony Bartolotta, Laura Coburn, Peter Emerson, Tim Fox, who's no longer in our community, Peter Mackwitz, who I thought was going to be here, and I don't know if he's here yet, was another member of the group. The late Fred Richardson, who kept us on track many times and focused. Doug Wayne, Joe Bartolota, Pat Carbonaro, I don't know if he was able to get here yet. Rick Emanuel, Dr. Phil Gover, who at that time was going to be the interim president of the college. I mentioned Mr. Miller, and of course Ed Sales, who we'll talk about a lot when we get here, and I know he's a member of our group, and he is over here. You know, I saw him. So these folks all got together up in the Business and Industry Center up at the college for what was supposed to be a 2 or 3 hour discussion about how to deal with the casino. And the remarkable thing about the discussion was the word casino never came up in 3 hours. Never even came up. Because the group wasn't looking at this as being what we were against or what the community was against. It was, how do you take the assets that we know are here and move them forward? So as many of you may remember, 10 years ago, a couple things to know. There's a lot of talk about economic development. There was no CETA. There was no coordinated economic development at any level. We had a lot of tools in a toolbox, but sometimes the tools were all spread out all over. Auburn Memorial Hospital was in the process of getting the results of the Burger Commission excuse me?
Drive-in report.
No, Burger Commission, to reduce the number of beds as well as to close the maternity ward at that particular time. And then, of course, if you went downtown at night, what you saw usually at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock on a weekend was wind squirrels. You did not see anything on State Street. You didn't see things on Genesee Street. The Auburn Public Theater had just started maybe a year before that and was fledgling. They had a great plan, but they needed energy downtown. So the group basically started to talk about that the glass was half empty, but it could be filled. It was dirty maybe, but it could be cleaned, but it wasn't in the worst shape of a community at all. So they started to have this conversation, and so with the community connector and coming out, they came up with 7 particular items that came up during the discussion. This is the list that was presented to the Chamber of Commerce at their January 2007 economic forecast luncheon. And so the group then met on a regular basis, created some subcommittees from there, and really delved into these items. And it also generated some thought and some money came to the table as well. So again, the focus was not on the issue of the casino, it was how do you make things better. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about some of these particular items and some of the people who came together. But one of the key factors here was this issue of how do you bring in not only grant money, but philanthropic money. And it really changed the way philanthropic efforts in this community somewhat changed. For example, one of the things that occurred was this philanthropic community talked on a regular basis more often and talked about how things should be reviewed and put forward. The end result was that in 5 years after this program started, there was a study done by one of the partners in here it was called the Blueprint Effect. And at that particular time, the thought was that in 5 years, so think of nothing after 2012, from this perspective, $85 million was leveraged into this community as a result of some of the blueprint. How do you get that? Well, this $11 million building is one of those. You look at $5 million that was put in the pavilion. Auburn Community Hospital, which got a name change during this whole process, $11.5 million was invested there. $12 million into this block and some other items through the Stardust Foundation. The Allen Foundation leveraged $10 million into Orchard Street. Think about what Orchard Street looked like 10 years ago. And then, of course, the Creative Corridor that we talked about, where we have everything from Prison City Brewery to A.T. Wally's up above, $3.4 million. And you start going through that. Andrew Fish, who's not in the room today, was one of the people who said if it wasn't for the original Blueprint group, that the Chamber most likely would not have focused and gotten ready for the Red Sea applications that were due 3 years later. So these types of conversations started at that time. So with that, other people came into the community. Judy Randall, who many of you may remember, that Meg Vanek was always great to bring her in, a travel consultant to really talk about what was going on in the community. One of the things, for example, is the lack of hotel rooms, or at least new up-to-date hotel rooms. I think at that time, 75% of the hotel rooms in Cayuga County were 1990 and before, if I remember my numbers correctly. And so she came in to talk about how do you get a hotel built here. And so over the years, the group evolved. Some offshoots were that. A second Blueprint group came up, and many of the people in this room were part of that. I didn't list everybody from the original group, but we also created the Blueprint 2 group, which is why Jeff Alvarez is here. So we're going to give you an update really quickly on maybe 4 or 5 minutes on each subject of each of the areas that were discussed. And then Dan Fezin is going to talk about where do we go from here and have a discussion about what's still on the plate that needs to be done in Auburn as we go. So with that in mind, the first cheerleader, the person who put all of our materials together, it seemed to, and was the go-to woman on many things, was Laura Coburn, back there, from everything from our PowerPoints that were all Apple related, to items such as our brochures and getting the word out and helping to coordinate many of the committees. So I'll turn it over to Laura.
Thank you,
Guy, and thank you for having the idea to bring us together and to sort of celebrate and talk about where we are now. It occurred to me as you were talking, and I was thinking back about all the people in the room and all the ideas that were generated, is that we could spend, 12 Wednesday morning roundtables talking about the history and all of the people involved and all of the contributors and the funders and the leveragers, and we can't do that today. So what I'm going to do is start us off by just giving a very cursory overview of where we are now on cultural development, and I regret that I can't mention every person that really got us to where we are now in the cultural development realm. But many of you may remember that when we got together and talked about cultural development, the primary idea that came out of the meetings was something that Ed Sales brought to the fore, and it was this idea of a musical theater festival. And since that was conceptualized and then subsequently studied as part of the blueprint, Auburn has seen the birth of the Finger Lakes Musical Theater Festival. That happened in 2012, was the first season. And then in relationship to that, Auburn Public Theater developed their 199-seat venue, which became part of the festival. And also Theater Mac at the Cayuga Museum developed their carriage house, which had originally been a venue, but redeveloped that into a flexible space, which now houses the pitch, as well as other cultural performances throughout the year. The Finger Lakes Musical Theater Festival is enjoying success in many areas. As part of the Finger Lakes Musical Theater, the Merry-Go-Round Playhouse continues to be recognized for its artistic standards and is praised for its consistent excellence in the arts. The multifaceted organization has a strong team that currently produces an annual season at the Playhouse at Emerson Park, the Pitch at Theater Mac, and operates the state's largest professional touring youth theater, serving more than 70 school districts, reaching 125,000 youth, with critical arts exposure and education programming through the Merry-Go-Round Youth Theater. Currently, the festival stages performances over a longer season than before, has a reputation for producing bold, compelling, exciting work, is dedicated to the development of new works, and has garnered greater global and national visibility. The festival's attendee demographics also show a widening geographic base. Currently, the festival attracts 30% of the city of Auburn. Goals include growth in the local market, and future growth is predicated on the increase in regional tourism and regional audience attendance. As a direct result of this initiative, Merry-Go-Round Playhouse, which was, by the way, founded in 1958 under another name, but again, not time for a lot of history, has become and continues to emerge as a strong player on the theatrical landscape of prominent regional theaters. Auburn has many reasons to be proud of this powerful arts organization, as evidenced by the numerous arts initiatives and economic development in the city's core and in the community. And if you want to read a little bit more, I just will reference a resource that I looked to. There was a recent, well, maybe not so recent, but letter to the editor, and you can go on the Citizens website and read about that as well. So would you like me to move now to riverfront development? Okay, so I'm skipping order a little bit, but it was also my happy task to report on riverfront development, which is also very exciting. Wednesday Morning Roundtable hosted an update on riverfront development in February of 2015, and for those of you who were there, you got to see the exciting plans laid forth by the City of Auburn planning team. The city is currently waiting on state and federal approval of the construction documents for the first phase of the trail. The first phase section will run from State Street to Mill Street Dam. Most of it is on street developments. And the street developments will include replacement of sidewalks, striping for bike lanes, signage, signal improvements. And significant improvements are planned for the area along Loop Road, opposite Market Street Park, Canal Street, and the Mill Street Dam area. These areas include, as appropriate in each specific area, a multi-use trail, benches, tables, lighting, interpretive signage. The city anticipates approval before the end of this year and bidding for the project in the first quarter of 2017. Ideally, work will begin in 2017, early, that in the spring. So that's great news as well.
Thank you. Let me tell you about one item that didn't work of the group. And so more than 7 items were listed out on whiteboards up at the college. For example, government consolidation was one of those items that was listed out there and may have been either a 7th or 8th item. But even Mike Mazzolio said, you really want to get buried into fights about turf. And he was right. But other items did get on there, and one of those was this issue of infrastructure and technology. And dealing literally with this digital divide that was twofold. One was the expense, as you all know, when you pay your cable bill or pay your bill to your phone company for internet connections here, not only in the city of Auburn, but throughout the county. We've all heard the stories if you were somebody who was, for example, in an agricultural community and had to download or upload your reports to the federal government and had to use dial-up with AOL, and you got 2/3 of the way through after 25 minutes and the system went down, you'd have to start back over. The other part of the digital divide was this issue that not everybody can afford a laptop or a device at that time that was not as small or had as many apps as we have today. But one of the discussions was to see if Auburn could become a Wi-Fi or WiMAX community. And the idea was that we would literally go out there and put Wi-Fi downtown and start from there. And that would help with economic development. It would help, at that point, the chamber and other economic developments in the city and the county, help to attract people because Wi-Fi and technology of that type was very expensive if you were going to put that infrastructure in. And I will say that it was one of the, if I have, and this is why I volunteered to do this one, if we had one failure of the whole group, it was this one. At the time, we had really done some research. We had, Jesse Klein was very helpful on this particular item, and we had several other people working on this. We had looked at WiMAX and what other communities were doing. And frankly, we had a city manager, not the city council, but a city manager who just didn't like how quickly technology changed. He had been in the military. I will not name him, but he felt that every time you would go forward, that you put technology in. I just wanted to make sure nobody said it was Mike Long. It was not Mike Long. But thought that every time you put technology in, 2 months later, it would be out of date. And so there was a group, for example, the investors in State Street did put, and it's still Wi-Fi down there, thanks to Jack Bisgrove and the Chamber of Commerce, but if you go to that block, there was that effort to create Wi-Fi downtown. We know that, and I know Dr. Durant's here from the college, there's this issue up at the college with people at Lattimore Hall and others about not being able, if you're a student, to get free Wi-Fi. So while the group tried to really talk about this, fortunately other groups stepped into that mix. The clearest one is the state of New York and the Smart Schools program. Both Connie Evelyn as well as Jeff Carozzola, who I know is here, really stepped to the plate with some filing for some state money. And so roughly $3.5 million, I believe that's the number, is being invested in Auburn schools to talk about this, whether it's Chromebooks and other items of that nature. But the school district did that. One of the most interesting, though, offshoots of this was what the people in southern Cayuga County did. The local governments and one of the people who was very instrumental in putting a grant together, which would cover 2 counties, both southern Cayuga County as well as northern Tompkins, with the help of the county planning department. I know Steve Lynch is here as well. Was a $2.2 million grant to bring Wi-Fi and bring that technology to that area. And I think if you drive, now that all the political signs are gone in southern Cayuga, I think most of them are gone, you can see a lot of provider signs down there now as you drive down towards Ithaca. So we still think there's a digital divide, and many of us have talked about this from time to time on this particular item, especially when it comes to education and those who can't afford to get to have either a hookup or, more importantly, the hard drive materials and the technology to access it. So we're hopeful, but again, there are some bright spots, there's some exceptions, again, like the creative corridor up the street, as well as Southern Cayuga, and again, the school district is there. The other one, and I'll skip a little bit, is the Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and that eventually became the Stardust Entrepreneurial Institute. And just as by way of an update, this one started a little bit before Blueprint, where there was a $500,000 grant made to the college when Dr. Galladay was here to look at entrepreneurship. And while the goals evolved over time, it really focused on how do you get incubation occurring to start businesses off and get them off the ground, as well as to use the assets of the college to facilitate that. And while a great deal of effort, and through Dr. Galladay and his successors, a lot of effort was put into Carla DeShaw's program in workforce development, SEI kind of went on a different path. There was the idea that 2 State Street, when it was purchased and renovated, would become an incubator. And as research always does, it finds new things, and found out that that wasn't the best location for incubators. And I do know that the Chamber and CETA are working with the Emerson Foundation and others to looking at other sites, not necessarily downtown, for the incubation model. The other item that SEI kind of worked on was trying to connect many of these other items to other things within the community. One of the direct offshoots, and I know Joe Bartolotto, who I think is going next, will talk about economic development, was this issue of how do you bring those economic tools together. The end result was that recently the Stardust Entrepreneurial Institute did 2 things on State Street. One is they have donated the building to the Chamber and to CETA to make that still and continue over the long term to be the economic development one-stop. And the second one is they built a building across the street, and we're looking forward to hearing what their next venture is over where Choices for Change and the Old American Red Cross are, across from Nash's over there. One direct result, though, of the Institute was this issue of how do you leverage money outside of the community in here. And one of the items that was effort and money was put into was creating the Finger Lakes Grants Information Center. And just out of curiosity, how many of you have ever done something with Ginny Kent at 2 State Street? So the idea was, see, there's a guy in the back who just smiled when he saw all those hands go up. Was that this was an idea that if you could leverage money from outside the community, and again, when we talk about that $85 million from up until February 2012, that was the idea, bringing others into the community to invest their money, whether it was through grants from the federal or state government, but really looking at helping 4 distinct groups, local governments, educators, not-for-profits, and then businesses themselves to do that. So a direct result of that particular Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship was the Finger Lakes Grants Information Center. So someone who got dragged into all of this, thanks to his father, was Joe Bartolotto. And he most likely, look at the face, it says it over there. At that particular time, there were 2 subjects that came up that he most likely had no involvement at that time. He did on the periphery on economic development with Logan Park Lost, but not to the extent that he would literally get involved in. And then, of course, he got dragged into Auburn Community Hospital and is their chair of their board right now. So he's going to give us an update on those 2 particular items that occurred in our community as well. Joe.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So I've been tasked with updating the group on a couple of different initiatives. And excuse the old man glasses, but it is what it is. So I've got a couple initiatives to cover. One is healthcare and one is economic development. I'll start with the economic development. I kind of grouped this with several other initiatives that was undertaken by the group. That'd be job development, arts and culture, and urban core. So it's kind of lumped together into economic development. So in 2006, when the Blueprint gathered, one of its visions was to retain, expand, and attract businesses to the region and to create a vibrant downtown. It had outlined some strategies to be used in expanding that, and that was to create an economic development coalition with dialogue and collaboration between county, city, towns, and villages of Cayuga County. So at the time, there were some great economic development agencies and a lot of great people that were working to propel economic development in the county. Unfortunately, it was a splintered system. So there wasn't a lot of communication amongst the different agencies that were there to help young budding businesses or businesses that are here and established and looking to expand. So one of the initiatives that the blueprint envisioned was to try to create a one-stop shop of economic development, somewhere that an existing company or a new company looking at Auburn to commence some business could go to, sit down, and rather than have to navigate the alphabet soup of economic development, could have one person to help them navigate the system. And so at the time we had a number of different great resources: Cayuga County Chamber of Commerce, SCORE, Cayuga County Office of Planning and Economic Development. We had Auburn Office of Planning and Economic Development, Cayuga IDA, Auburn IDA, the Local Development Corporation for Auburn, and one for Cayuga County. So there was a lot of different agencies happening. Due in large part to a lot of efforts on all of the agencies collaborating and different people working together, they were able to create a one-stop shop for economic development. And that was the Chamber of Commerce merged resources with CEDA, which is the Cayuga County Economic Development Agency, to form an umbrella, and they're both now located at 2 State Street, where there is a one-stop shop. Now these businesses can go to one person. Right now it's Tracy Verrier, was Andy Fish. And through a series of different service contracts, they administer a lot of the paper pushing for the other agencies. So it's a great vehicle for economic development, and I think that you can see the fruits of those efforts in the community. Aside from a lot of expanding businesses within the county, our downtown is now vibrant. We've got new eateries, we've got new retail establishments. Since 2006, we've placed approximately 100 new housing units in downtown Auburn. So you can see the fruits of those labor. Again, I can't emphasize enough, it was through the efforts of many on the city, county, local level, and state to bring that to fruition, but it's created a much better economic development vehicle and environment to do business in Auburn. I'll switch gears now and get into healthcare. So another one of the initiatives that the blueprint put forward to target was healthcare in Cayuga County. And again, one of the visions was to provide leadership and support for the provision of comprehensive, compassionate, quality healthcare in Cayuga County. And it had outlined some strategies to facilitate healthcare as an economic development stimulus for job creation, to improve access to primary care, and to continue to develop recruitment and retention of quality physicians. In 2006, it's hard to think of healthcare in Cayuga County without focusing on Auburn Community Hospital, at the time Auburn Memorial Hospital. And I've been really privileged to be on the board there for some time now. In 2006, the state of the hospital was in real shambles. We had just filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, lost over $25 million since 2001, and had over $25 million in unsecured debt. Horrible quality scores that placed us among the worst in the country, and we had real struggle recruiting quality physicians and retaining quality physicians. And then lastly, the Berger Commission had just decided to close our maternity ward. So there was a lot facing it. What a difference 10 years makes. Things have really, a lot of, again, good people working together, the Board of Trustees, the management team, I know Scott Berlucci's here today, the employees, the unions, the state, local political leaders, Senator Nozzolio, Senator Seward, Senator DeFrancisco, Assemblyman Finch, all played a huge role in rolling up their sleeves and helping to turn the hospital around. And today, we've got ACH has got a new strategic plan, forming a comprehensive integrated healthcare delivery system, made remarkable financial turnaround. We're now profitable and are actually in the black each month. The quality scores have improved to the point where some of our quality scores have us ranked in the top 7% of the nation. Huge impact. That's another thing that people tend to lose sight of. In addition to providing healthcare as a sole community provider to 100,000 plus people, it's also an economic engine. We are the single largest private employer in Cayuga County, employing nearly 800 employees, and we pump into the local economy each year approximately $178 million. So it's a huge asset that a lot of us tend to take for granted, and it was on the brink of, possibly closing down just 10 years ago. We've won a number of different awards. The Stroke Center was awarded for a Gold Plus Achievement Award recently. The Finger Lakes Center for Living, which is our nursing home managed by the hospital, just was awarded a 5-star rating from CMS, which is the highest possible ranking to get. Information Technology Systems was designated our hospital one of America's most wired hospitals by the American Hospital Association. And lastly, the Berger Commission, not only did they turn their decision to close our maternity ward, but through the generosity of the Stardust Foundation, we were actually able to completely rehab the maternity ward. And we have 4 new birthing suites, 7 postpartum suites, an exam room, and a new nursery. And this year we're on pace to deliver 400 plus new babies to the community. So, some of you may have heard that we're working on an affiliation right now. We're in discussions with University of Rochester Medical Center and St. Joe's. We've got a long way to go, but we are collaborating on service lines and discussing possible affiliation that'll enhance the service lines that we have and expand them and ensure stability for the next 100 years, hopefully, for our community hospital. Again, like I said, there's efforts of a lot of people went into this, and thankfully, the hospital's in good financial state right now. Thank you.
So this is a follow-up to that particular item, and it really, we received 2 communications from 2 people who were part of the original group that have moved on with their careers. But one of the items that really came up with the Berger Commission was the issue at that time is I think Auburn was averaging between 250 and 300 births a year, and they were not necessarily births of, many Auburnians went out who could afford to, went to other facilities to go to have their children. And one of the thoughts at that time was, what happens when you do close down a maternity ward for the rest who couldn't go to community, or couldn't go to upstate, or couldn't go to Krause or St. Joe's? So a lot of effort was put in there. 2 individuals who were very instrumental in those discussions, as well as economic development, were Dave Smith, who many of you remember, was the plant manager at Nucor at the time. He's now since moved on to, many of us know he went to Utah, but now he's in Memphis with his wife, still with Nucor, and he sends his best to all the group. He says he hops on the Citizen website on a regular basis just to see what's going on. The other one is the person who used to run the Citizen, and Rick Emanuel sent a note last night. He's hoping to drive up from Corning, but he said this was, as far as he was concerned, his efforts with the Blueprint Group were one of the best things he ever did in his tenure here in Cayuga County. So both of them have asked to say hello to those who worked with them for many, many years here. One of the items that is not on here was to look at the next generation, and almost everything on here was about the next generation. How do you make sure that young people stay in the community? How do you create opportunity for the community? So one of the groups that kind of was created, besides this group, and the Wednesday Morning Roundtable and Finger Lakes Grants Information Center and a lot of other programs, was the idea of creating what was called Blueprint 2. And Jeff Alvarisi, who is a history teacher with the Auburn Large School District at Auburn Junior High, I don't call it East Middle anymore, was very instrumental in putting a program together to try to create the next generation of not only volunteers, but community leaders and philanthropists. So we'll have him make a presentation as well.
Is the mic working?
It is not, so if you want to stand there, I know you can be heard.
Welcome, I am Jeff Albarisi. I'm going to actually do the opposite and take my glasses off because I can't read with my glasses on. I came in and it's a great opportunity today just to speak to some of the leaders within the community. And so I said to my mom, I'm like, look, Mom, look, I have Laura, I have Guy, I have Joe, I have Dan, I go, and then there's me. And she goes, Jeff, don't worry about it. Try to be more like your siblings. So I'm not quite sure what she meant by that, but here we go. The vision for this came back probably 9 years ago. I was looking back through all of my things, and it came through Jack Bisgrove. He sat down with my brothers and I, and we had a dinner, or actually a lunch, and he just had a conversation to say, one of the things that we want to do, and I had read a little bit about Blueprint too, I can't say that I was, or Blueprint, I can't say that I was in the midst of things. He said one of the things that we'd like to do is really move forward with the youth and try to have something where youth are learning about their community and where youth are moving things forward within the community on those things that are important to that. So we started off with that vision, and I'd love to sit here and say, oh yeah, it was all me. It was almost none of me. It was all a lot of people that I was able to bring around me, a lot of conversations with God, with boxes all over the place. I could live like that guy, I'm not gonna lie. But boxes all over the place on State Street and having conversations about, did you look at this, did you look at this, did you look at this? Jack was always there explaining to us, maybe you don't want to go in that direction, because every time a new idea came up, we thought we were spot on. Our goal then became to take youth, to explain what was happening within our community, and then to give them an opportunity themselves to make a change. If you've been through Leadership Cayuga, how many of you have been through Leadership Cayuga? All right, 2010, best class ever. But
92.
89.
They directed me in that route, and I can't say, in education, the one thing I've learned, you steal good ideas. You don't look at a good idea and say, oh, geez, I wish I could do that. You just steal them. All right, I always joke around, if there were people going in, you want to arrest a lot of teachers, go with copyright laws. I mean, teachers are terrible about that stuff. But it really is one of the things that we then began to focus in on, was how do we set something up for kids that is similar to Leadership Cayuga? And that really then became our goal. So our focus then became an 18-month program. In the first 6 months, we did a lot of leadership training. Again, a lot of guidance went into this, but there's a great program over in Marcellus where they do ropes. We brought kids out on ropes, and you had kids 60 feet in the air. I'm not going to lie, I did a few of those things. I was very, very nervous, but these were kids pushing themselves to new places. But the bigger part of this became having a kid pick up a telephone and talk to an adult. As easy as that sounds to you and I, for a child that is a daunting task to have to pick up a phone and ask somebody for help. And the one thing that I've seen, and I'm sure it's not just in this community, but when you ask for help, it's amazing the people who come out and help. And that is the great thing about communities in general, but especially this community. So the focus in the beginning of the first 6 months was on this leadership training. From there, the next 6 months, we had the kids come up with a project. What's important to you? Not what's important to me. Because it goes back to what God was saying. If you can have something that's important to kids, then they can say, look, I made a difference in my community. And I'm realistic about, I have my own 2 children that are going on. And at this point, they're not saying, hey, I want to come back and I want to live in Auburn. But the truth of the matter is, when I was a senior in high school, when I was in college, I wasn't saying to my parents, I'm going to move a half a mile away from you. I can't wait. That was my last words. Maybe that goes back to, I should be like my other 6 siblings. But that was, the idea is to give them processes and systems in which they could understand how to change things that were around them and to change things that were important to them. So we spent that time, they did research. Incredible the people who would come in and sit down and talk with these students at nighttime. Because most of this ran at nighttime after school hours, after sports hours, these kids were asked to give up one Monday a month, or not, I'm sorry, one Monday a week. They would give up a couple hours, hour and a half to 2 hours, and they would sit down, and they were talking to community leaders, and they were coming up with projects. Our initial projects were huge. We had kids that worked on, they wanted to bring back the rocket slide because that was the biggest thing that they had heard about. They never had a chance to go down the rocket slide. They started off very big. And within that first year of those projects, we were able to get a shelter, the boat launch shelter, which is really a very nice shelter. They were able to secure money for that. But what we found out is when they did that project, they couldn't do a lot of the work on that project, the building of that shelter, for pure insurance purposes, putting kids out there. So with, again, a lot of directions, we began to scope and scale down what we were asking kids to do for not something that someone else could complete, but something that they could complete. And that's really the track that we moved into. It's a process, and like I said, we've run it through. We're trying to go every 2 years with this. Part of that now is we're looking for funding as we go through those things and finding funding. The Blueprint organization and Stardust had been unbelievably generous to us. We also have branched out and we do some 5th grade leadership training, we do some middle school leadership training. We're still trying to figure out our high school leadership training, parts of that. But what we're doing and what we feel like we're doing is giving kids an opportunity to learn leadership at an early age. Because as those things present themselves in college or early in their career, we want them to have a step up on everybody else. To be able to say, oh, I've done that before. Let me call this organization, or let me go to this place because I know how to deal with those individuals, or I met those individuals, I know who they are, they know who I am. And that really became the focus, is this development of leaders at a young age. And it's nice because a week ago, I was walking to lacrosse, or going to lacrosse, and I was talking to one of the moms. Her daughter goes to Cornell. She's like, I got to send you this link. My daughter just did a minute and a half thing on Cornell and why you should come to Cornell. She goes, what a great thing. She would have never done that a few years ago. But the ability to step out of yourself, to climb high on ropes, that's what we're trying to do, is build leaders that hopefully, and as we saw in this here, we'll go on to other communities and do great things, but eventually, like we all do, make our way home, okay? And that's really become the goal. For me, this has been an extraordinary opportunity, and to say, I mean, the school district has been incredible to me. I'm here today. You know, just little things like that. It's amazing, and it really came out of this, and it makes a difference. I sat down as I'm putting this all together, and I said to my son, I go, he had an opportunity to go through it. I said, Nick, what did you think about Blueprint 2? Do you think it had an impact? And he starts rattling off all these things. And I'm like, boy, I said, it's great. It's great to know that here, 5 years later, a kid that's looking at possibly going into military school is defining his leadership that came out of his, he went through Lead in 5, but also his middle school years and what he learned. And that is the goal of this project, the goal of the program. And I think that it's having an impact. I truly think it's having an impact. There's 40 to 50 kids that go through it every other year. So it's small in scale, but it's definitely helpful for those kids that are going through it. And it all comes right out of here. If you looked at our Blueprint 2 logo, it looks exactly the same, minus it has a 2 at the end of it. So, I mean, it really is born from the Blueprint 2 and our blueprint, and it's been an exceptional thing for myself as an individual in growth, and I think for a lot of the youth within our community who have had the opportunity to go through it. So, I appreciate your time. I hope that's great. Mom, I hope I did all right.
So just out of curiosity, how many of you have either had a child or a family member who's gone through Blueprint 2 or spoke to that group over their 5 or 6 years? And I know I do want to say, single out, I know the mayor was always gracious with his time, as was Con Riley, who was with BID at that point, was always conscientious about addressing that group. So I want to thank that. You can still see their work around town. If you go to 100 Diner, you look across the street, there's 2 benches there that those students put together. They cleared out the Wasco Flats one year, only to have the state DOT redo the work, only to have Senator Mazzolio, who again couldn't be here today, have to intervene with the State Department of I was going to say State Department of Entertainment, the State Department of Transportation. It wasn't entertaining at that point. Fix what the students had done. So thank you for that. So one of the common themes that was the common theme prior to Blueprint coming about, when Blueprint came about, and through the years, and if you look at this morning's Citizen, is still an issue, has been this last issue of watershed protection. And a lot of effort has gone in to talk about Wasco Lake and the watershed, one of the largest watersheds in upstate. And one of the people who led that effort for the group was Dan Fessenden, who's going to give us an update on that. Dan.
I knew if I played my cards right, my friends would leave me about 30 seconds, so that's exactly what they did. So I've got the task of talking, literally, I'm going to give you a very small piece on watershed and see if I could try to put a little bit of a wrap around the discussion that we've had with you this morning. So thanks for your attentiveness. Interestingly, as watershed and lake issues are the last item we're talking about this morning, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, it was actually the 7th and last issue that we kind of vetted and put onto the list. And you're going to say, well, why was that? And it wasn't that it was an afterthought or that there wasn't concern for water quality in this community, but I don't think it's kind of a ubiquitous issue. And as we realize that all the other things that we added to the list, without a healthy lake, none of the other issues were even going to matter. Whether you're trying to attract tourists, whether you're having recreation, whether you're trying to do job development, all of those things, drinking water supply, all of those are out the window if we lose the lake. So I think that that was why we realized we needed to say something and put a stake in the ground and say this was important. So 10 years ago, the Finger Lakes Institute had just kind of done a study. New research came out. Wasco Lake was the most impaired of the Finger Lakes. And we said, this really isn't where we need to be on this issue. And we put a lot of focus in saying, let's put our voice behind so many other voices that were there at the time and continue today at the time, fighting for an important, very valuable resource in our community. So I just want to say with a very, very shortened version of what I wanted to share with you this morning around Wasco Lake. It is and remains integral, probably out of all of these things. It's one of those things that's truly a journey, not a destination. We're never going to be able to take our eye off of this ball, and I think that that's an important thing for us to realize. So with that, and let me just check my time, because we're always good about getting out of here. We've got literally about 5 minutes. So what I was going to say, and my task this morning a little bit was to try to kind of come up with a way to kind of bring a thought or two to the end of this discussion. 10 years ago, I guess if I had to say, when I was part of the group that was thinking about these issues, how strong of a effect Blueprint could have on the community, I don't think any of us knew at that time. But I think as I look back on it, I really think that the Blueprint was a pivot point for this community. It allowed us to start thinking about things that were positive, new, different, and bring ideas to the fore and put some energy behind all of them. And I think that that's exactly what it has been able to accomplish. I think what probably caught my eye more than anything in the few years that followed Blueprint were the number of communities that kind of looked to Auburn and say, wow, I heard about this thing that Auburn is doing. So a lot of other communities kind of, I think, to borrow Jeff's thought, kind of took some privileges and liberties with the idea that we had to kind of bring together a group of community leaders. None of us were at that time vested in elected officials and public officials in any formal role. We all cared. And I think that that's what brings us together every month in this room. We all care. And so I think, if anything, that probably caught my eye when I realized other people were saying, what's happening in Auburn? And I think that continues today with so many of the other things that are good and positive about this community. So we normally, in best circumstances, try to leave some time for Q&A, some dialogue, and I'm worried that we're not going to have a lot of time for that. One of the things I thought I would call an audible, other than Hal Miller in the background, there's a hand up. Hang on just a second. I'm just going to kind of give an audible idea. Jesse's client's going to kill me for this, but I was going to say, if rather than having a lot of time for Q&A, I was just going to pose some questions to the group. And if you had a thought, idea There's evaluation forms on all the tables. Jot down an answer or a comment that might pertain to some of these questions, and then we will open up and see if we've got time for just a few. But I guess some rhetorical questions, or questions that you can ask yourself, or maybe put into the mix of things here. Did the blueprint really have an impact on this community that you can identify? And how well does this community surface priority issues today? In other words, 10 years ago, I think there was a question, are we really getting at the issues that are going to count and matter and make a difference? So how well do we do that as a community today? Another question might be, is it time to consider a new blueprint effort? Kind of white sheet of paper, what's important today? What should we be putting the stake in the ground today? And then the last one, if you believe that, maybe another question you might want to put a thought to is, what priorities do you think would be on that blueprint agenda today, or should be on there? So those are rhetorical questions. Think about them, jot them down, or I'd be happy to take a quick question or two, and I'll only do it on time. 2 or 3 minutes. 2 or 3 minutes. Excellent. Hale.
What is happening to the $600,000 grant that to cut down the algae and purify?
Oh, there's a lot of people outside this room and some even inside this room that know a lot more about water quality than I do. Does somebody want to take a stab at that? Bob, Steve? I don't know. I don't have the right answer to that. Bob?
Now, but along with that, why do we have to stop the level of the lake in summertime, which of course affects us greatly at one point, because Lower Brook goes in there and lake level goes down, you get algae right at the end of that, and all summer long. We've seen a year-to-year deterioration of the situation.
The only thing I know is that there's not an answer to that question that's going to fit our time here this morning. Those are great questions, and I wish we had more time on lake issues, but those are complex ones. Mother Nature had something to do with the lake level this summer. I know that for a fact. She had something to do with it, but yeah. Anybody else want to jump in before we have to make it a wrap?
So, thank you all for being here this morning, and we thank our 4 presenters for joining us this morning. Also, we want to thank our 3 guests who joined us here today, Bob Pine, Al Miller, and Jack Bisrow, who really were instrumental when this was all started. So, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this morning. So if you leave your notes, if you would, Jesse will collect those. We would ask you for your name tags and to fill out your evaluations. We'll be back next month to talk about West Middle School. Sue Kimball will be here from 2+4, as well as Jeff Carrizzola and Liz Smith. Enjoy your Thanksgiving.